And there we go. All right, so we are on board, up and running. And hi, my name's Tad, last name Williams, occasionally called that guy, not him again, any number of things. And I respond to virtually anything, virtually, really, honestly, anything. So, just wanted to say hello and welcome you to our evening session. I'm going to be reading some of Shadowmarch tonight. Big shock there. We've been doing that for a month or so. And what else am I going to do? Juggle, dance, sing. I don't actually have anything else I'm going to do tonight. It's enough just to get through another week. My needs are small. My ambitions are modest. I'm doing it week to week at this point, folks. But anyway, so we are all doing well here. No complaints, no worries particularly. Everybody vaccinated, as you know. Everybody not back to normal life, obviously. We're still observing all the protocols. We're wearing masks when we go out of the house, etc. But other than that, no complaints. We are not suffering the hideous heat wave that our friends and neighbors up in the north, the Pacific Northwest, Oregon and Washington particularly, are suffering. And for that, we are glad, obviously, but we are also very, very aware of what's going on up there and worrying about everybody in that area and hoping that they are staying safe and cool and healthy. So anything else I was going to mention? Nah, just the usual. Just the usual. I'm working on various projects. We are doing the the copy editing stage of Brothers of the Wind, which, if anybody wants to see a copy of the cover for that book, that's available on the various bits of social media of mine. You can find that on my Twitter page or my Facebook pages, or stuff like that. So we're working on the copy editing on that. Other people are reading the first half of The Navigator's Children, which is still not titled. Once again, my humiliating attempt to finish a trilogy in 3 books has come a cropper, and so it's having to be split. And so various of the kind of the deep state of Tad Williamsville, the deep state operators are going through it right now, looking for obvious, terrible, stupid mistakes, which I make many. As well as less obvious, less terrible, and less stupid mistakes, which are kind of inevitable when you put together a 1,000-page manuscript and send it off for other people to look at, especially when you thought you were going to have to cut about 1/3 of the manuscript, and then when you found out it was going to be split into 2, went, hell, and put most of that stuff back in again. So I'm sure there are going to be weird things that people are going to be coming back to me and going, this guy died here, and then he's alive the next chapter, and stuff like that, because of shuffling various bits of the manuscript and taking things out and then smoothing the differences and then realizing I was going to put them back in and unsmoothing all kinds of stuff. So anyway, that's what's going on with various projects. Well, there are other various projects too. I mentioned I was working on a short story. I'm about to get back to work again on the final part of Navigator's Children and many other things. So, but you take these things when they come in, and you take the things that have the big screaming, blinking red lights and sirens on top of them saying, deadline, 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 those go first. So right now we're doing deadline, deadline, deadline on the copy editing for Brothers of the Wind. So anyway, and so with all that said, there's not really that much to announce this week. Just spent the week working and thinking and thinking and working, and for me, thinking is working. Thank God, because then people leave me alone. When I look like I'm lying down doing nothing, I'm usually actually thinking about things and juggling storylines and whatnot. So that's it. So I'm just going to say hello to everybody, and then we're going to get on with reading. I hope that's okay with all of you. Excuse me. So, who have we got? Jared. Hello, Jared. Good to see you. Tim. Greetings and salutations to you too. Jerry. Yo, dude. Becca. Hooray. Good to have you. Kelly. Sweltering Canada. Oh, God. I'm sorry, Kelly. It must be miserable. Kenneth. Hello. How are you, Kenneth? Mr. Kelly. If you're going to call me Mr. Williams, I'm going to call you Mr. Kelly. That seems fair. I can't say Mr. Williams is my dad because, as some of you may know, I don't actually know my dad, my biological father. I have a dad who is my stepdad, technically, but he's my dad. So there is no Mr. Williams. He has a different last name, as do my younger brothers. Anyway, so I can't do that old cliche, Mr. Williams is my father. Call me Biff, or whatever it is. But you can call me anything you want to, as I said. I don't particularly worry about it. Barb Ann, hello, good to see you. Nancy, hi, Nancy. Sunday night, your favorite part of the week. What a nice thing to say. Thank you very much. I'm glad to hear it. Regina, hello, how are you? Lori, good evening. See, she's doing Mr. Williams too. That's probably because she's also a Williams, and so she's subtly drawing attention to that fact. Medardo. Hola, Tad. Muy buenas noches. Hola a todos. Good evening. Hello to everybody. Y también muy buena suerte en la semana que viene, and good luck in the week to come. It's always a very merry hour. It is a merry hour, and thank you for coming to visit and to hang out, as always. Kristen, hello, Kristen. How are you? Jeremy, good evening. Yes, this shirt is full of personality, isn't it? It's another one of the lovely shirts Deb gets for me, and to be honest, I'm very pleased to be doing this, so I actually have a purpose to wear a nice shirt every now and then instead of the normal slovenly hobo gear that I usually mope around the house in when I'm working. So yes, you guys are getting the benefit of, well, I don't know, it's a pretty dubious benefit, but you're at least seeing a slightly better dressed Tad than people who would show up at my door would find. People who would show up at my door would be like, oh my God, Bigfoot or something. Anyway. Emily, hello, good evening, Emily. And, oh, you stayed up. Okay, Kristen. Well, I will try not to keep you up late again. We should be done by 8 o'clock or so. No, they are not in sync. 2 a.m. is one chapter ahead of 7 p.m. That is absolutely correct. If you want to hear them all in order, you have to listen to them all. But if you don't want to, that's okay too. There are no rules. There are no rules here. This is a knife fight. Mike, hi. Sorry, that's an old Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. That predates even, what was his name? The Australian guy with the knife. Crocodile Dundee. It predates Crocodile Dundee. It's a famous old Butch Cassidy reference. So I don't know why I'm bothering to explain, because you either know or you don't care. Mike, hi from Idaho. Oh, God, you too. I'm sorry to hear about the heat. Stay cool, stay calm, and stay indoors. Ray, good to see you. Claudia, hello, Claudia. And who else have we got that I haven't said hello to yet? We've got the other Ray. Hello, Ray. Even Douglas Adams. Yeah, but Douglas Adams, he could get away with it as a joke. Douglas Adams could get away with it as a joke. I can no longer get away with the 5-book trilogy thing. Well, 4 in this case. Don't let me scare you. It's everybody knows. It's humiliating. It's like being the town drunk or something. I'm always coming in and banging through the doors of the bar going, yeah, this time, I swear to God, I am totally quitting. I am totally quitting. I'm giving it up. Just this one more book. This trilogy is done. So it's not funny. Nobody thinks it's funny. Not even me. I'm so sad. I'm so embarrassed. Anyway, Franz. Oh, Frank. It's Frank. Hello, Frank, calling from Köln. Yes, we met on the Germany tour. I do remember. So good to see you, Frank. Thank you. Oh, Lori. Hello. You were adopted too. Well, we have the same last name. Maybe we have the same dad. Who knows? Who knows? I have no idea what he did after he left our burgeoning family behind. So could be. Anyway, not that it's an uncommon name. It sure as heck isn't. And it's mostly Welsh people. Did you know that, folks? Did you know why? This is my understanding. So anybody who is a better historian than me can correct me. But the reason Williams is one of the most common Welsh names, I think right after Evans and Jones and Evans, or maybe even ahead of Evans, I'm not sure, which, by the way, is my stepfather's name. So my brothers are Evanses and I'm a Williams, and we sound very Welsh because of that. Anyway, the reason that, as far as I know, that Williams is such a common and popular Welsh name is because the Normans showed up, and the Welsh, of course, did not get along very well with their Anglo-Saxon neighbors, the Welsh being Celts, the Anglo-Saxons being Anglo-Saxons. And so, in fact, many of the Welsh welcomed the advent of William the Conqueror, killing off the Harold, the king of the Britons, and taking over. So Williams was probably William's man for a lot of people. That's probably what it meant in the first place, and then it rolled over into just being Williams. Anyway, that is what I have been led to believe. If I am wrong, if you know something different, feel free to correct me. That is one thing about me. The older I get, the better I am at saying, I didn't know that, or, that's interesting, or even, wow, I was totally wrong. That's one of the distinct values of getting old, is that you get better at admitting you don't know everything. And for somebody like me, who spent a large part of their youth eagerly trying to prove that I knew everything about everything, it's much more relaxing to be able to go, I didn't know that. Oh, that's cool. All right. Or even better, wow, I was totally incorrect. That's good to know. Thank you for explaining to me why I was wrong. Anyway, so we are back to Shadowmarch. Ooh, look how nicely it goes with my shirt. This, of course, is the English edition that was published by Orbit, with whom I no longer am. There's a complicated bit of grammar, syntax. Orbit is no longer my English publisher, but that's where this edition came from. So just for those of you who are completists about these things and are curious. Anyway, so we were reading last time how Ferris Vanson and Colum Dyer were wandering through the woods after being separated from the rest of their troop. And Colum Dyer had been sort of infected by the spirit of the far side of the shadow line. Not literally, but I mean, he had kind of fallen under the sway and for a while was really spooky. And then he suddenly came out of it and almost couldn't believe that any of that had happened. So he and Ferris Vanson are making their way along, trying to find their way back out from behind the shadow line again, after being separated from the others. Somewhere, in the timeless and arbitrary middle of their day, Vanson spotted a group of figures traveling away from them, struggling along a ridgetop at what looked like half a mile's distance. He and Dyer were down in a small canyon, hidden by trees, and at first his strong impulse was to hide until these creatures were gone. But something about the stockiest of the climbing shapes snagged his attention. After a moment, attention turned to incredulous delight. By all the gods, I swear that must be Mikkel Southstead. I would know his walk anywhere, like he had a barrel between his legs. Dyer squinted. You're right. Bless him. Who would ever have thought I'd be happy to see that old horsin'? Energies renewed by hope, they ran until they no longer had the breath for it, then continued to climb up the steep hillside at a slower pace. Dyer wanted to shout. He was terrified that they would lose their comrades again. But Vanson did not want to make any more noise than was necessary. It already seemed as though the very land was disapprovingly aware of them. They reached the top of the ridge at last, staggering up onto the crest and stopping to gasp for breath. When they straightened up, they could see the others just a few hundred yards ahead along the ridgetop, still laboring forward, unaware of Vanson and Dyer. This joyful sight was undercut slightly by the view from the crest. The forest stretched as far as they could see on all sides, with no landmark more recognizable than a few hilltops, like the one on which they stood, jutting up at irregular intervals from the mists that blanketed the shadow country like islands in the Vuttish archipelago surrounded by the cold northern sea. Vanson was still winded, but Dyer sprinted ahead. Now that they were so close, Vanson could see that there were only 4 other survivors and that one of them was the girl, Willow. His heart lifted. The idea that he had brought the poor tortured creature back to the place that had affected her so badly the first time had been troubling him in his more lucid moments. But only a little. Far more troubling was the rest of his missing guardsmen. Until now, he had been able to convince himself that the rest of the troop was together and looking for them. Now, he had to admit, the problem was not simply that Vanson and Dyer had got themselves lost, but rather that Ferris Vanson, a captain of the Royal Guard, had lost most of his men. The princess was right, he thought bitterly as he started after Dyer. I am not to be trusted with the safety of her family, and I should not have been trusted with the lives of these men either. Dyer had caught them and embraced Mikkel Southstead, though he had never liked him much. As Dyer threw his arms around the other two soldiers, Bach and Dolly, it appeared, Southstead turned to Ferris Vanson with a self-satisfied grin. There you are, Captain. We knew we'd find you. Vanson was vastly relieved to see even this small portion of his men alive, but was not quite certain he agreed with Southstead's idea of who found whom. I am pleased to see you well, he told Southstead, then clapped the man on the shoulder. It was a little awkward, but he wanted no embraces. Father? The girl said to him. She looked more ragged than the others, her dress torn and muddy, and her face had lost the cheer it had possessed even in madness. He had a terrible notion of what might have happened in his absence, but also knew that there was nothing he could do about it. Nothing. He beckoned her toward him. I am not your father, Willow, he told her gently, but I am happy to see you. I am Ferris Vanson, the captain of these men. They wouldn't let me go home, Father, she said. I wanted to, but they wouldn't let me. Vanson couldn't help shuddering, but when he turned back to the others, all he said was, We will make camp, but not here. Let us move down into the valley where we're not so easy to see. Between them, Vanson and the remains of his troop scraped together enough biscuit and dried meat for a meager meal, but that was the last of their provisions gone, and their waterskins were also nearly empty. Soon they would have to drink from the shadow streams, and perhaps eat shadow food as well. He had already had difficulty restraining Dyer from eating berries and fruit while they traveled, some of which looked quite familiar and wholesome. So how much more difficult would it be now that he had 5 of them to watch? It quickly became apparent that Southstead and the others had experienced some of the same things as Vanson and Dyer, but not all. The shadow line had crept over them while they slept, and the rest of the men and the merchant Beck apparently went mad, much as Dyer had done, disappearing with the horses and leaving Southstead, Dolly, Bach, and the girl Willow stranded on foot. But Southstead and his company had not seen the host of the Twilight People on the march, and with the return of his wits, Colum Dyer did not truly remember it either, leaving Vanson as the lone witness. He fancied that the others looked at him strangely when he spoke of it, as though he might have invented it all. What would they be doing, Captain? Young Dolly asked. I mean, going to war? With whom? With us, Vanson said, trying to keep his temper. With our kind. Which is why we must hope we can get back to Southmarch with the news before that army of unnatural things gets there. It also quickly became clear that despite his claim of finding Vanson, Southstead and the other 2 guardsmen had been completely lost, wandering hopelessly, although Southstead claimed he would have found his way out of the woods, given a proper chance. The fact that these 3 guardsmen, none of whom Vanson thought of as very clever, had not been driven mad by the magic of the Shadow Forest made him a little more uncertain about his own resistance. There seemed to be no reason for who was completely overcome and who was only buffeted by the strangeness of the place. More disturbing, resistance did not seem to give them the ability to find their way out again, but Dyer, in his former madness, had seemed certain he knew which way to go. As the men argued about who would stand watch, Vanson suddenly had an idea. Although he still feared his men had mistreated the girl Willow, perhaps even raped her, he realized he might, in his anger, have misunderstood something she was trying to tell him. She was sitting close to him, not speaking, but clearly more comfortable near the man she sometimes imagined was her father. "You said they would not let you go home," he said to her quietly. "What do you mean?" She shook her head, wide-eyed. "Oh, I can see the road. I tried to tell them, but they wouldn't listen. The one who looks like Arrow Bullpup said he knew where to go and that I should keep my mouth shut." She slid closer to him. "But you will let me go home. I know you will." Ranson almost laughed at the girl's description. The jowly Southstead did indeed look more than a little like a bulldog. But what she had said was important. She found her way out of Shadow once, he thought, before we found her. He patted her on the head, carefully disengaged his hand from hers. She had a good, tight grip on it, and stood up. "I'll take the first watch," he announced. "The rest of you play dropstones or whatever you wish to settle your turns. Tomorrow you follow a new leader." Southstead did not look happy, but he grinned anyway. "As you wish, Captain, of course, but you and Dyer did no better than us." "I'm not going to be leading," he said. "She will." Despite the grumbling of the men, after the little troop had been up and following Willow through the gray forest for a few hours, Vanson actually saw the moon for the first time since they had fallen into shadow. It was only a glimpse when some unfelt wind in the heights scattered the mists for a moment, and he was a little disturbed to think it might be the middle of the night when his body had been telling him it was day, but he still regarded it as a good sign. The girl seemed certain of where she was going, walking on ahead of them in her tattered white dress like a ghost leading travelers to the place of its murder. Perhaps it was hunger. The younger the man, Vanson had learned during his time as a guard captain, the more they thought about food. But somewhere, during what everyone except Mezia's pale orb believed was the afternoon, Dolly suddenly stopped in his tracks. "There's something in that thicket," he whispered to Vanson, who was closest to him. He took his bow off his shoulders and pulled out one of the 2 arrows he had saved from the collapse of their mission and the disappearance of the horses and packs. "If it's a deer, Captain, I'm going to shoot it. I don't care if it's the King of Elfland in disguise. I'll eat it anyway." Vanson laid a hand on the young soldier's arm as he knocked the arrow, squeezing the arm hard. "But what if it's Adcock or one of the other guards wandering, lost, maybe wounded?" Dolly slowly lowered the bow. "Good. Take Dyer and Balk and see if you can move in quietly." While Vanson and Southstead and the young woman watched in the silence, the men closed on the thicket. Dolly abruptly dove into the deepest part of the undergrowth, and Balk climbed in after him. The leaves were rattling, and both Dolly and Balk were shouting to each other, "There! It's running there! It's a cat! No, it's a bloody ape, but it's fast!" Dyer waded in last, and the 3 converged. The branches thrashed furiously, then Dyer straightened up with something the size of a small child struggling in his arms. Vanson and the others hurried forward. "Perrin's balls!" swore Vanson. "Don't get scratched, Colin. What is it?" The whining, scratchy cries of the thing as it fought helplessly against the much larger Dyer were disturbing enough, but hearing it suddenly speak the common tongue was terrifying. "Let go me!" it shrilled. Startled, Dyer almost did let it go, but then he squeezed until it subsided. The guardsman was breathing hard, his eyes wide with fear, but he was holding the thing tightly now. Vanson could understand why the others mistook it for an ape or a cat. It was vaguely man-shaped, but long of arm and short of leg, and was furred all over in shades of gray and brown and black. The face was like a demon mask that children wore on holidays, although This demon seemed to be as frightened as they were. "What are you?" Vanson asked. "Something cursed," said Southstead, his voice cracking. The thing stared at the guardsman with what looked like contempt, then turned its gaze on Vanson. The bright yellow eyes had no white, and only thin black sideways slits for pupils, like a goat's. "Goblin am I," it rasped, "under Three Waters tribe. You, dead men, all." "Dead men?" Vanson repressed a superstitious shiver. "She bring white fire. She burn all your houses until only black stones." It made a strange hissing, spitting sound. "Wasted, my leg, old and bent, fell behind. Never I see the beauty of her when she ends you." "Kill it," Southstead demanded through clenched teeth. Vanson held out a hand to still him. "It was following the army of the Twilight people. Perhaps it is one of them. It's certainly their subject. It can tell us things." He looked around, trying to think of what they could use to bind the creature, which was struggling again in Dyer's grasp. "Never," the thing said, the words raw and strangely shaped. "Never help Funlanders." A moment later it squirmed, abruptly and violently, contorting itself in such a way that it seemed to have no backbone, and sank its teeth into Colum Dyer's arm. He screamed in pain and surprise, and dropped the thing to the ground. It scrambled away from them, but one of its legs was clearly lame and dragged behind it. Before Vanson could even open his mouth to shout, young Dolly took 2 steps and caught up to it, then smashed it to the ground with his bow. A moment later, Dyer was there as well, holding his bloody arm against his body as he began to kick the writhing shape. Southstead caught up to them with his sword out and his mouth full of angry curses. The other 2 stepped back as he began hacking and hacking. All 3 men were making sounds like dogs baying, howls of terror and rage. By the time Vanson reached them, the goblin was long dead, a bloody tangle of meat and fur on the mossy forest floor, its lantern eyes already going dull. Barrick still refused to see her, but Bryony was determined. Her brother's outbursts and anger had been bad enough before, but now he was truly frightening her. He had always been prickly and private, but this strangeness about the potboy was something else again. She leaned down close to the wide-eyed page, who had his back against the prince's chamber door as though he meant to defend it with his 10-year-old life. "Tell my brother that I will be back to speak with him after the evening meal. Tell him we will speak." As she walked away, she heard the page hurriedly open the door and then almost slam it closed behind him, as though he had just escaped from the cage of a lioness. Are there people here who fear me as much as they fear Brome? As they fear Barrick's moves? It was an odd thought. She had never conceived of herself as frightening, although she knew she was not always patient with what she deemed foolishness or dithering. Zoria, virgin warrior, Zoria of the cunning hands, give me the strength to be gentle. The prayer reminded her of that fool of a poet and her sudden whim. Why had she decided to keep such a creature around? Just to annoy Barrick and the Lord Constable? Or because she truly did enjoy even such ridiculous flattery? Her mind muddled with these thoughts, she walked down the long hall beneath the portraits of her ancestors, living and dead. Her father and her grandfather Euston, and her great-grandfather, the third Anglin, without really seeing them. Even the picture of Queen Lily, scourge of the Grey Companies, and the most famous woman in the history of the March Kingdoms, could not hold her attention today. although there were other times when she would stand for hours looking at the handsome, dark-haired woman who had held the realm together in one of its bleakest hours, wondering what it would be like to make such a mark on the world. But today, although the familiar sight of her other clansmen and clanswomen had not moved her, the picture of Sanasu, Kellic Edna's queen, caught her eye. It was unusual for Bryony to give the portrait more than a glance. What little she knew of Queen Sanasu was dreary, of her painfully long years of mourning after the great King Kellic died, an obsessively silent, solitary widowhood that had made her a phantom to her own court. So detached had Sanasu become in the last half of her life, family stories related, that the business of the kingdom had fallen entirely to her son years before he became king in fact, something that made the responsible Bryony loathe the woman without knowing anything more about her. But today, even as absorbed in worries as she was, Bryony could not help staring at something in the likeness she had never really noticed before. Sanasu looked very much like Beric. Or rather, Beric, her many times great-grandson, looked much like Sanasu, which was accentuated by the black mourning garb they both favored. And these days, with his pallor and striking haunted eyes accentuated by his bout with the fever, Beric looked more like the long-dead queen than ever. Bryony stood on her toes for a better look, wishing the light in the ancient hall were better. The artist who had made the portrait had no doubt prettified his queen, but even so, the Sanasu in the picture had the almost transparent look of someone very ill, which only made her red hair even more shocking, like a bloody wound. She also seemed astonishingly young for someone who had lost her husband in middle age. Her face was odd in other ways, too, although it was hard to say exactly why. I can see Father's eyes in her, too, and his coloring. Bryony suddenly wished she knew more about great Kellic's widow. The portrait made Sanasu look mysterious and foreign. Bryony couldn't recall being told anything about where the melancholy queen had come from before marrying Kellic, but whatever distant land might have spawned her, it had now been a part of the family heritage for centuries. Bryony was suddenly struck by how the blood of the Edens, her own blood, was like a great river, with things appearing and disappearing and then appearing again. And not just looks, she thought, but moods and habits and ruling passions too. Queen Sanasu had famously stopped talking to those around her and exiled herself to Wolf's Tooth Spire so that she was seen by only a few servants and became all but invisible for the 2 or 3 decades before her death. Was that what was in store for her beloved, moody Beric? That ghastly thought, and the continuing fascination of Sanasu's white, otherworldly face, had grasped Bryony's interest so firmly that she nearly screamed when the ancient jester Puzzle stepped out of the shadows nearby. "By the gods, fellow!" she demanded when her heart had slowed again. "What are you doing? You startled me out of my wits creeping up like that." I'm sorry, Princess. Very sorry. I was waiting for you." He seemed to be considering whether he should get down onto one extremely creaky knee. Bryony reminded herself of her own prayer for Zorian patience. "Don't apologize. I will live. What is it, Puzzle?" "It is just—" He looked as anxious as Beric's page. "I am told that someone will share my room." She took a breath. Patience? Kindness? Is that too much trouble? It was a sudden thought. I'm sure we can find somewhere else to put this newcomer. I thought he might be company for you." "A poet?" Puzzle couldn't seem to grasp the connection. "Well, we will see, Highness. It is possible we will get on. Certainly I do not speak to many people since—"
Since your father has gone, and since my friend Robin died, it might be nice to have. He blinked his rheumy eyes. It was possible that her father Olin was the only person on the continent of Ion who had ever found Puzzle amusing, or at least amusing in the way the jester tried to be. What must it be like, she wondered, to be supremely unfitted for your life's work? Even if she was impatient with him now, Bryony couldn't help regretting the way she and Barrack had teased the bony old fellow all these years. If it turns out not to your liking, tell Ninor, and he will find the poet some other place. Thinright, or whatever his name is young and should be agreeable. Bad poets need to be agreeable. She nodded. Now, I have much to do. My lady, the old man said, still having trouble meeting her eyes, it was not that which I wish to speak about. Well, not as much. What else? I have a very great worry, my lady, something that I have remembered and that I fear I should have told you earlier. He stopped to swallow. It did not look easy for him. I think you know I visited your brother on the night of his death, that he called for me after supper, and I came to his chamber to entertain him. Brone told me, yes. She was alert now. And that I left before Lord Shazo came. Yes. So? By the gods, Puzzle, don't make me work it out of you word by word. He winced. It is just your brother, may the gods grant his soul peace, sent me away that night. He was not kind. He said that I was not diverting, that I never was, that my tricks and jests only made him feel even more that life was wretched. Kendrick had only told the truth, but she knew he must have been distressed indeed to be rude to old Puzzle. Her older brother had always been the most mannerly of the family. He was unhappy, she told him. It was an unhappy night. I am sure those were not his true thoughts. He was worried about me, remember, about the ransom for the king, and whether he should send me away. The jester shook his head in confusion and defeat. He was bareheaded, but the gesture was so familiar she could almost hear the tinkle of his belled cap. That is not what I wanted to tell you, Highness. When Lord Brone asked me about that night, I told him what I remembered, but I forgot something. I think it was because I was so disturbed by what Prince Kendrick had said. A hard blow for someone who has devoted his life to the pleasure of the Edmonds, you must admit. Whatever the reason, what did you forget? Gods, defend me, he certainly does test a person's patience, she thought. As I left the residence, I saw Duke Galen walking toward me. I was in the main hall, so it did not occur to me he might be going to see your older brother, and I did not mention it to the Lord Constable after that terrible event. But I have been thinking and thinking. Sometimes I lay awake at night worrying, and I think now that he was walking the wrong direction to be going to his own chambers. I think he might have been going to see Prince Kendrick. He bowed his head. I have been a fool. Bryony didn't bother to reassure him. Let me understand this. You are saying that you saw Galen Tolley heading toward the residence as you were leaving, and you saw nothing of Shazo? Not that night, but I went straight to my bed from there. Are you very angry, Highness? I am an old man, and sometimes I fear I am becoming a weakling. Enough! I will have to think about this. Have you told anyone else? Only you. I believed you would. He shook his head again, unable to say what he believed. Shall I go tell the Lord Constable? No. She had said it too forcefully. No, I think for now you should tell no one else. This will be our secret. You will not put me in the stronghold? I suspect that sharing a room with that poet fellow will be punishment enough. You may go, Puzzle. Long after the old man had tottered away, she remained standing beneath the pictures of her forebears, thinking. Chapter 23, The Summer Tower. Chapter 23, The Summer Tower. Sleepers. Feet of stone, legs of stone, heart of aromatic cedar, head of ice, face turned away. From the Bonefall Oracles. He practically had to fight his way through the women to get to her. The physician could feel their resentment, as though he were some long-absent lover who had put this baby in her and then left her shamed and alone. But the king is the father here, not me, and Olin is not absent by choice, he thought. Queen Anissa had grown so round in the belly that it made the rest of her slight frame seem even smaller. Seeing her, in the center of the bed, surrounded by gauzy curtains like trailing cobwebs, he had a momentary image of her as a she-spider, gravid and still. It was unfair, of course, but it set him thinking. Is that Shaven? To make room for him, she pushed away one of her small dogs, which had been sleeping against the curving side of her stomach, like a rat dreaming of stealing a hippogriff's egg. The dog blinked, growled, and stumbled down to join its companion, who snored near her feet. Come here, quickly. I think I will give birth at any moment. From the look of her, she might have been right. He was surprised by the dark circles under her eyes. In this room of draped windows, the only light an unsteady glow from the candle-studded altar, she looked as though she had been beaten. You need more air in this bedchamber. He took her hand and gave it a quick, formal kiss. The skin was dry and warm, a little too much of both. And you look like you aren't getting enough sleep, my queen. Sleep? Who could sleep in such a time? Poor Kendrick, murdered in our own house by a trusted servant, and then plague all through the town. Do you wonder I keep the windows covered to keep out bad airs? Calling Shazo a trusted servant seemed an interesting way of characterizing him, and the fact that she had not counted her husband's absence in her list of worries might also have been thought strange, but Chavin did not respond to her words. Instead, he busied himself examining the queen's heartbeat and the color of her eyes and gums, then leaned in to smell her breath, which at the moment was a little sour. The plague is all but spent, Highness, and I imagine you were in far greater danger from your own maid when she had it than from it floating in from the town. And I sent her away until she was better, you can be sure. Didn't I, Celia? Celia, where has she gone? Has she gone for seeing why I have no breakfast yet? Ah, must you poke me so, Chavin? Just wishing to be certain that you are well, that the baby is well. He let his hands move across the drum-taut arc of her stomach. The old midwife was still staring at him in a way that was a little less than friendly. What do you think, Mistress Isolde? The queen seems well enough to me, but you have more experience with such things. The old woman showed a crooked smile, perhaps recognizing his gambit. She's stronger than she looks, though the baby is a big one. Anissa sat up. That is just what I am feared of. He is big. I can tell how he kicks. One of my sisters died birthing such a child. They saved the baby, but my sister died all washed in blood.
She made a southern sign against evil happenstance.
She was afraid, of course. Chavin could see that. But there was also a hint of falsity to her words, as though she played up her fear in hopes of sympathy. But why shouldn't she? It was a frightening business, childbirth, especially the first time. Anissa was already well past 20 winters, he reminded himself. Not yet in the time of danger for first mothers, but certainly past her prime, according to all the learned men who had written about it. This was also the first time Chavin had heard her refer to the baby as he. The royal physician did not doubt that the midwife and her coven of helpers had been at work, perhaps dangling a pendulum over Anissa's stomach or reading splatters of candle wax. If I order you a medicinal draught, will you promise to drink it every night? He turned to Isolde. You will have no trouble finding the constituents, I'm sure. The old woman raised her eyebrow. If you say so, doctor. But what is it, Chavin? Is it another one of your binding potions that will turn my bowels to stone? No, just something to help you sleep. The baby will be strong and hearty, I am sure, and so will you be if you do not sit up nights frightening yourself. He stepped over to the midwife and listed the ingredients and their proportions. Mostly wild lettuce and chamomile, nothing too strong. Every night at sundown, he told the old woman. He was beginning to doubt that flattery worked on her, so he tried another tack, the truth. I am a little frightened to see her so restless, he whispered. What are you saying? Anissa moved herself heavily toward the edge of the bed, disturbing the dogs and setting them growling. Is something wrong with the child? No, no. He came back to her side, took her hand. As I said, Highness, you are frightening yourself without need. You are well, and the child is well. The plague seems to have passed us by. Praise the Cupolas, Madi Surazem, and all the gods and goddesses who watch over us. She let go of his hand, touched her face. I have not been out of this place so long. I must look a dreadful monster. You look nothing of the sort, Highness. My husband's children think I am. A monster? Chavin was surprised. That is not true, my queen. Why would you say such a thing? Because they do not come to see me. Days go by, weeks, and I do not see them. When she was excited, her accent grew thicker. I do not think they will love me like a mother, but they treat me like a serving maid. I don't believe Princess Bryony and Prince Beric feel that way at all. But they are much occupied, he said gently. They are regents now, and many things are happening. Like that handsome young Summerfleet. I heard something bad has happened to him. Didn't I say that, Isolde? When I heard he left the castle, I said something is not right there. Didn't I? Yes, Queen Anissa. Chavin patted her hand. I know nothing for certain of Galen Tully except that there are many rumors. But rumors are not to be trusted, are they? Not in a household already so upset by death and your husband's absence. She grabbed his hand again. Tell them, she said. Tell them to come to me. You mean the prince and princess? She nodded. Tell them I cannot sleep because they shun me, that I do not know what I have done, so they are angry with me. Chavin resolved to pass the message along in a slightly less heated form. It might be useful to convince the twins to come and visit their stepmother before the child arrived, for any number of reasons. He removed his hand, disguising the escape as another kiss across her knuckles, then bowed and bade her farewell. He suddenly found that he wanted to be alone, to think. The little page had been roused from his pallet on the floor and sent to make his bed anew in the outer chamber. They were finally alone. "What's troubling you so?" Bryony sat down on the edge of the bed. "Talk to me." Her brother pulled the fur lap robe. Excuse me. Her brother pulled the fur lap robe up across his chest and huddled deeper into the blankets. It was not a warm night, not with true winter on the doorstep, an orphan's day less than a month away, but Bryony did not find the room particularly cold. Is he still suffering with that fever? It had been at least a tenite, but she knew some fevers did not loose their grip for a long time, or came back again and again. "Why did you say that idiot poet could stay in the household?" "He amused me." Was she going to have to discuss it with everyone? "In truth, I thought he might amuse you, too. He tried to convince me he was writing an epic poem about me. A panegyric, whatever that is, comparing me to Zoria herself. The gods alone know what he'll compare you to. Perrin, probably. No, Erebor in his seahorse chariot." She tried to smile. "After all, Puzzle isn't as diverting as he used to be. I think I'm beginning to feel too sorry for him. I thought it would do the two of us good to have someone new to make fun of. Which reminds me, Puzzle came to me when I was leaving your room earlier today. Told me that on the night Kendrick was killed, he saw Galen in the hallway." Barrick frowned. He seemed not just sleepy, but a little dazed. "Kendrick saw Galen? No, Puzzle saw Galen." She quickly repeated what the old jester had told her. "He has heard that Galen has disappeared," Barrick said dismissively. "That is all. He wishes to be remembered as denouncing him if it turns out that Galen is a traitor." "I don't know. Puzzle never bothered with politicking before, because Father was here to protect him." Barrick's expression suddenly changed into something vague, distant. "Do you like him?" "Who?" "The poet. He is handsome. He speaks well." "Handsome?" "I suppose, in a prettified sort of way. He has an absurd beard. But that is certainly not why I said he could." She realized she had been led astray again. "Barrick, I don't want to waste any more breath on that callow fool. If you dislike the poet so much, give him some money and send him away. I don't care. I'm convinced he's nothing to do with the greater matter, which is what we're going to talk about." "I don't want to." He spoke with all the dolefulness that he had made his art. Bryony wondered if other siblings felt this way, sometimes loving and hating at the exact same moment. Or was it only twins, so close that it often seemed she had to wait for Barrick to breathe before she could get air into her own lungs? "You will talk. You almost killed that potboy. Why, Barrick?" When he didn't reply, she leaned across the bed and clutched his arm. "Soria, preserve us! This is me! Me! Bryony! Kendrick is dead. Father is gone. We only have each other." He looked at her from beneath his lashes like a frightened child. "You don't really want to know. You just want me to behave well. You just hate it that I embarrassed you in front of Brome and that poet." She blew out breath in exasperation. "That's not true. You are my brother. You're nearly the other half of me." She found his eye and held it, but it was like trying to keep a skittish animal from bolting. "Look at me, Barrick. You know that's not what happened. The potboy said something about dreams, about your dreams. Then you tried to throttle him. He had no right to talk about me that way." "What way, Barrick?" He pulled the blankets even tighter, still deciding. "You said You read the letter from Father again, he said at last. Did you notice anything interesting? About the autarch? I already told you. No, not about the autarch. Did you notice anything interesting in it about me? She stopped, confused. Anything? No, no. He sent you his love. He said to tell you his health had been good. He shook his head. His face was grim, as though he were stepping out onto some narrow prominence, trying not to look down at a great distance opening before him. You don't understand. How can I? Talk to me. Tell me what has you so upset. You tried to kill an innocent man. Innocent? That potboy's no man. He's a demon. He saw into my dreams, Bryony. He spoke about them in front of you and Brone and that mongrel Quill Carver. Despite the chill, Beric had a thin sheen of sweat on his forehead. He is probably talking about them still to anyone who'll listen. He knows. He knows. He turned and rammed his face against the cushion. His shoulders heaved. Knows? Knows what? She grabbed at his arm with both hands and shook him. Beric, what have you done? He turned, eyes damp, red-rimmed. Done? Nothing. Not yet. I can't make any sense of this at all. She combed a tangle of damp red hair back off his brow with her fingers. Just talk. Whatever is wrong, you're still my brother. I'll still love you. He let out a snort of disbelief, but the storm had passed. He let his head fall back on the cushion and stared up at the timbered ceiling. I'll tell you what Father's letter said. Tell Beric that he should be glad for me. Although I am a captive, my health has actually been much better this last year. I almost think it has done me good to get away from the damp northern airs. That's what he wrote. Bryony shook her head. What, do you think he means that he is happier being away from us? From you? He is jesting, Beric, trying to make light of a terrible situation. No, he's not. Because you don't know what he's talking about, and I do. The fire in him had died down. He closed his eyes. Do you remember the nights when Father couldn't sleep? When he would go to the Tower of Summer and sit up all night with his books? She nodded. The first few times, Olin's ability to slip away had been the cause of much alarm around the residence, until his family and the guards had learned to look for him in his library in the tower. The king had returned each time from these midnight excursions with an embarrassed air, as if he had been found in drunken sleep on the throne room floor. Bryony had always believed that it was thoughts of his dead wife that tormented him so badly on those nights that he could not sleep. He always spoke of their mother, Marielle, as though he had loved her very much, even though the marriage had originally been arranged by his father, King Euston, when Olin and Marielle, the daughter of a powerful Brenish duke, were both very young. Everyone in the household knew that her death had been a hard, hard blow for him. And you remember that he would always bar the door? Of course. Locked out, the guards had only been able to rouse the king by banging on the door until he came to open it, blinking like an owl and wiping at sleepy eyes. I think he cried. He didn't want anyone to see him weeping. Over our mother. Beric showed a strange, tight-lipped smile. Weeping? Maybe. But not over our mother. What do you mean? He glanced up at the ceiling and took a few deep breaths, as though he were not merely standing on some high, lonely place, but preparing to jump. I went there one night. I had a nightmare. I think I must even have been walking in my sleep. It might have been the first time, because I woke up outside his chamber, and I was very frightened, and I wanted him to tell me things would be all right. I went in, and he wasn't there, even though his servants were all there, sleeping. I knew he must be in his library. So I went out of the residence by that back chapel door so the guards wouldn't stop me. It was near midsummer, I think. I only remember it was warm, and it felt so strange being out in the courtyard in my nightshirt and bare feet. I felt like I could go anywhere, just walk where I wanted to, even walk to another country, as though the moon would stay up and bright as long as the journey would take. And that when I woke up there, I would be a different person. He shook his head. It was a full moon, very big. I remember that, too. And I think I'm going to stop there because there is no natural stopping place for a while. So we'll leave it with Beric as a child, walking off in search of his father under a full moon. And with that, we will wrap it up for the evening. And as always, I thank you for joining me and for sharing some time with me. And I will be seeing you next week, as far as I know. I don't know of anything that will change the plans. Although somewhere up the line, Deb and I may decide to go off for a weekend or something, but don't know. But it is summer, and we haven't done anything in terms of going for a weekend or something for quite some time. But that is all pure speculation. I don't have any plans immediately, and so I fully expect to be back next Sunday at 2 a.m. my time, and then again at this slot, 7 p.m. my time. So again, thank you for joining me. Y'all be good to yourselves, be good to others, stay out of trouble, or if you can't stay out of trouble, get into a good kind of trouble. And I will be talking to you next week. Okay. Peace